Hi everybody, welcome to Live Blogger. I have combined all the videos in our Scrollable tabs tutorial series into this single long video so that it's easy for you to follow. Now in this video we're basically going to create this scrollable tabs right here. So here we can see we have this right arrow, and if I click on that we can move to the right, and if I click on this left arrow we can scroll to the left, and we can also drag to the left and the right. And if I click on any of these tabs we will have that highlighted over here with a different styling. So this is what we're going to design in this video, and I will also leave the link of the source code in the description, and in the end I will also show you how to add this to your Blogger website. So let's get started. Right here I have created this folder called Scrollable Tabs, and I just opened it with VS Code. Now let's create the necessary files. So let's click on New File, and let's create an HTML file. I just name it index.html, and we'll also need a CSS file. Let's create a new file and let's name it style.css, and we'll also create a JavaScript file. Let's name it main.js. Right, let's start with the index.html file. Now in VS Code you have the shortcut where you can just press exclamation and press tab, and you'll have this basic HTML5 code. And let's type link and press tab, and here I'll just link the CSS file. So I'll just type style.css, and let's also link the JavaScript file over here. So I'll just type script :src and press tab, and here I'll just type main.js. Right, now let's start with the markup of our design. Now the first thing we will do is we'll create a container division, and let's give it a class of scrollable tabs container. Now the first thing we need to have in this is the left arrow, which we see over here on the left. So let's create a division and let's give it a class of left arrow. Now in this we will add the icon. So we will use the icons from heroicons.com. Right here I'm in heroicons.com, and let's search for left. And here we have these icons. Let's choose this icon right here, chevron left. So let's click on copy SVG, and let's go back and paste it over here. And let's open this in our browser and let's see how it looks. So I have this extension called Live Server installed in VS Code. So once you have that installed, you can just right click over here in the HTML and click on Open with Live Server. And now here we can see that the left arrow is being displayed. Now the next thing we need to have are these categories or these labels. So let's go back, and for that we'll create an unordered list. So outside this left arrow division, let's create an unordered list. And in that we'll have list items, and in the list items we will have anchor tags, and here you can add the links of these buttons over here. So the first list item we need to have is all, and then we have all these other list items. Now you can also click on any of these and these will be active. So let's go back, and here I'll just type all, and then we need to have all these other list items. So I'll just copy and paste these from my original design. Right, so here I have copied all these list items, and for the first one we need to have a class of active, because for the first list item here we can see we have this different styling. So here let's give it a class of active, and we'll style it in the CSS. And the last thing we need to have over here in the HTML is this right arrow. So let's create a division with the class of right arrow. And let's go back to the heroicons.com website, and let's search for right, and I'll just copy this chevron right icon from here. So let's click on copy SVG, and let's go back and paste it over here. Now if we go back to our design, this is how it looks. We have the left arrow, and then we have these list items, and then we have the right arrow. Now it's time for us to style this using CSS. So let's go back, and here we have already linked the CSS file. So let's go to style.css file, and let's start with the container division. So we have this class of scrollable tabs container. So let's target that over here. Let's type scrollable tabs container, and let's set the font family to Roboto, and let's set a background color of black. And we have a large size for the icons, so we cannot see all these content better. So first of all, let's resize the icons. So let's go back, and here I'll just type scrollable tabs container SVG, and let's set the width and the height to 24 pixels. And we'll also add a padding of 8 pixels, and we'll also set the cursor to pointer, and let's also set the color of the icons to white. So this is how it looks right now. Right now, let's get back to starting the scrollable tabs container. Now here we'll add a max width of 700 pixels, and we'll also bring it to the center. So I'll just type margin, and for top and bottom I'll just set the margin to 16 pixels, and for left and right I'll just set it to auto, and now it is in the center. And now let's also add a border radius. So I'll just type border radius, and let's set it to 4 pixels. So now we can see we have these rounded corners. Now the next thing we will do is we will position all these anchor tags one next to the other. So the anchor tags are inside the list items, which are inside the unordered list. So we will add a display of flex to the unordered list so that all these list items will be one next to the other. So here let's type scrollable tabs container UL, and let's set the display to flex. And now we can see all these list items are one next to the other. And we'll also add a gap of let's try 16 pixels, and I think that looks alright. For now, let's hide these icons. So here let's type display of none, and now here we can see this is how it looks. Let's add some padding to the UL. So I'll just type padding, and let's set the padding to 12 pixels top and bottom and 24 pixels left and right. And we'll also set the margin of the UL to 0. Right now the next thing we will do is we will style these anchor tags. So let's type scrollable tabs container A, and the first thing we will do is we'll set the color of the text to white, and we'll also remove the underline. So let's type text decoration, and let's set it to none, and let's add a background color. So here I'll just type background, and let's set it to dark gray. So I'll just type 333. Now let's add some padding to these anchor tags. So I'll just type padding, and let's set the padding to 4 pixels top and bottom and 24 pixels left and right. And we'll also set the display to inline block so that we have the correct margin and padding. So let's type display of inline block, and we'll also add a border radius, and let's set it to 4 pixels. Now we also need to remove these bullets from here. So for that, let's go back to the UL, and let's type list style, and let's set it to none. And we'll also remove the ability to select the text. So let's go back, and here for the anchor tag, let's type user select, and let's set it to none. And now we are not able to select the text. Now here we can see when we have multiple words, the words are split into 2 lines. So for that, let's go back to the anchor tag, and here we need to add a property called white space, and we need to set it to no wrap. And now we can see that all the text are in a single line. Now by default the first anchor tag is selected, so we need to have a different color. So here we can see we have a white background color and a dark text color. So let's go back, and if you go to the HTML file, here we can see we have already added a class of active to the first anchor tag. So here let's type scrollable tabs container a.active. Now this will only select the active anchor tags, and here let's add a background color of white, and let's set the color of the text to black. Right now the next thing we will do is we will hide all the content that goes outside this container. So we don't want to see all this text over here, we just want to see everything inside the container. So let's go back, and here for the main container, let's type overflow, and let's set it to hidden. And now if we go back to our design, here we can see all the content that is outside the container is hidden. But the problem is that we cannot scroll to the left or to the right. So for that, let's go back to the UL, and here for the UL you have to type overflow X, and you have to set it to scroll. And now if we go over here and if we scroll, we are now able to scroll to the left and to the right. Now here we can see at the bottom we have the scroll bar displayed, so we need to hide this. So let's go back, and here we need to type scrollable tabs container UL : hyphen WebKit hyphen scroll bar, and here we need to set the display to none. And now we can see that the scroll bar is not being displayed. Now this property is not for all the browsers, so you also have to type -ms -overflow style, and we need to set it to none, and also scroll bar width, and you have to set it to none as well. Right now, the next thing we will do is we will style the arrows. So here we can see we have this right arrow and the left arrow. So let's go back to our CSS and let's remove this display of none from here. Now we need to position these arrows relative to the container, which is scrollable tabs container. So here you have to tap position relative. And now let's style the arrows. So here let's tap scrollable tabs container, right arrow, and scrollable tabs container, left arrow, because those are the classes for the containers of the arrows. So here we have the right arrow and here we have the left arrow. So let's set the position of these to absolute, and let's set the height to 100% of the parent, and let's set the width to 100 pixels. And here we can see we have the left arrow. Let's tap top of 0, and now we can see we have both the arrows displayed over here. Now let's bring it to the center. So let's tap display of flex and align items to the center. Right now for the right arrow, we need to set the position to the right. So let's select the right arrow. Here let's tap scrollable tabs container, right arrow, and let's set the right value to 0. And now here we can see that the right arrow is on the right, but it is not exactly where we want it to be. It should be over here at the right side. So for that, let's go back to our style.css file, and here let's add a background color. And now we can see this is the width of the right arrow division. Now we need to position this to the right of this division. So for that, you have to type justify content, and you have to set it to flex end to move it to the right side. And let's also add a little bit of padding to the left and the right. So here let's tap padding, and I'll just set it to 0 for top and bottom and 10 pixels left and right. Right now the next thing we will do is we will add a linear gradient background color. So here we can see we have this fading color from black to transparent. So here we can see it clearly. So let's add this type of color. Let's go back, and here for the right arrow, let's tap background of linear gradient, and let's tap to left, and we'll start from black color and we'll set it to 50%, and then we'll tap transparent. And now we can see we have the correct color for the right arrow. Now let's do the same for the left arrow. So let's type scrollable tabs container, left arrow, and I'll just copy this background color from here. And here let's tap to right, and everything else will be the same. So here we can see we have the correct colors for the arrows. Now when we hover over these icons, we need to have a different background color. So let's type scrollable tabs container, svg :hover, and let's tap background, and let's set it to 333. And now let's go back, and if you hover over this, we have this background color. We'll also add a round shape for this. So here for the svg, let's type border radius, and let's set it to 50%. And now we can see we have this round shape. Now by default, we don't want to have the first arrow visible. So let's go to our HTML file, and here for the right arrow, let's add a class of active, and we will only display the arrows which have the active class. So let's go back to our style.css file. Now here for both the arrows, let's type display of none, and here let's type scrollable tabs container, right arrow dot active, and scrollable tabs container, left arrow dot active, and let's set the display to flex over here. And now if we go back, here we can see for the right arrow we have the active class, so that's being displayed over here. So everything is working as intended. Now in the previous video, I showed you how to create this design using HTML and CSS. So this is our progress as of now. Right now we are able to scroll to the left and to the right, but we don't have any functionality added to these buttons. So we don't have the left arrow displayed, and for the right arrow we don't have any functionality. And if I click on any of these anchor tags, they are not being selected. So if you go back to the original design, we are able to select each of these anchor tags. And we also have this functionality. When we click on this right arrow, we are taken to the right side, and when we click on this left arrow, we are taken to the left side. So this is what we're going to add in this video. Let's get started. Right, here is our source code, and we have already linked our main.js file. So let's start with the JavaScript. Now the first thing we will do is we will add the functionality. When we click on any of these anchor tags, we need to select them. So let's go back, and if you go to the HTML file, here we can see that for the first anchor tag we have this class of active. So when we have this class of active, we have a different styling. So if I just remove this active class from here, and if I add it to the second anchor tag, now we can see that the second anchor tag is selected. So what we need to do is we need to add these active classes using JavaScript when we click on the anchor tag. So let's go to our main.js file, and first of all let's reference these anchor tags. So the anchor tags are inside this scrollable tabs container division. So here I'll just type const tabs equals document.querySelector all, because there are multiple elements, and here we need to type scrollable tabs container, and in that we have the anchor tag, so I'll just type A. Now let's go ahead and add event listeners to all the anchor tags. Now since there are multiple anchor tags, we need to loop through each of the anchor tags and add event listeners to each of them. So we will use a for each loop for that. So I'll just type tabs.forEach, and for each of the anchor tags I'll just give it a name of tab, and let's add event listeners to all the tabs. So let's type tab.addEventListener, and let's listen for the click event. And when we click on the tabs, we need to set the active class to that tab. So let's type tab.classList.add and active. Now if we go back to our design, and if I click on this chess tab, here we can see it is active, and if I click on this live, it is active. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to remove the active class from the previous element when we click on a new element. So for that we'll create a new function. So I'll just create a function called remove all active classes, and in this we will remove all the active classes from all the tabs. So let's type tabs.forEach, and I'll just call it tab, and here let's type tab.classList.remove active. Now we need to call this function before adding the active class. So here I'll just type remove all active classes. Right, now let's go back to our design, and if I click on another anchor tag, we have the first one deselected and we have the new one selected. So everything is working all right. Right, now let's add the functionality of this right arrow. So if I click on this right arrow, we need to move the slider to the left. So let's go back to our code, and if you go to the HTML file, here we can see we have this division with the class of right arrow, and in that we have this SVG. So we need to add the event listener to the SVG. So I'll just reference this SVG from here into the main.js file. So here let's type const right arrow equals document.querySelector, and here let's type scrollable tabs container right arrow SVG. Right, now let's add an event listener to this right arrow. So here I'll just type right arrow dot add event listener, and let's listen for the click event. Right, now when we click on this right arrow, we need to move the UL, which is the container. So here we can see this is the UL, and in that we have all these list items. So we will reference this element right here. So here I'll just type const, and let's just name it tabs list equals document.querySelector, and here let's type scrollable tabs container UL. Right, now let's scroll down, and here we need to type tabs list dot scroll left, and here we need to add a value. So here I'll just type plus equals 200. Now you can add any value over here instead of 200. Right, now let's go back to our design, and if I click on this right arrow, we can see that the tabs list moves to the left. Now we need to have smooth scroll behavior. So right now we can see when we click on these arrows, it directly moves to that position. So let's go back, and let's go to the style.css file, and let's go to the UL, and here let's add scroll behavior, and let's set it to smooth. Now if you go back to our design and if I click on this right arrow, we can see that it smoothly scrolls to the next position. Right now the next thing we will do is if we click on this right arrow and if the slider moves to the left, here we need to have the left arrow displayed, and if we move all the way to the right, this right arrow should disappear. So let's add that code. Let's go back to our JavaScript file, and here we need to select the right and the left arrow containers. So if you go back to our HTML file, here we can see we have this division with the class of left arrow, and in that we have the SVG. So we need to select this container division, left arrow and right arrow. So let's go back to our main.js file, and here let's type const left arrow container equals document.querySelector scrollable tabs container left arrow, and let's also select the right arrow container. So let's type const right arrow container equals document.querySelector scrollable tabs container right arrow. Now if you go back to the HTML file, here we can see we have added a class of active to this right arrow. So that's why we can see that the right arrow is being displayed over here. Now if you go to a style.css file, if we scroll down and go to the right arrow, here we can see for the active class we are displaying the arrow, and when we don't have the active class we are just setting the display to none. So here we need to add and remove the active class. So what we will do is we'll create a function for that, and let's create a function called manage icons, and let's create this function over here. Let's type const manage icons. Now here we need to add some if conditions. So let's type if, and we need to check whether the scroll left value is greater than some value. We'll just set it to 20. So if the scroll left value is greater than or equal to 20, we will display the left arrow. So let's type tabs list dot scroll left is greater than or equal to 20. Now here we need to add the active class to the left arrow. So let's type left arrow container dot class list dot add active, and now let's add an else over here. So if the condition is not true, then we need to remove the active class. So let's type left arrow container dot class list dot remove active. Right now let's go back to our design and let's click on this right arrow, and now we can see that this left arrow is being displayed. Now when we scroll all the way to the right, we need to hide this right arrow. So for that, let's go back and let's add some code for that. Now for this we need to set a max scroll value. So let's create a variable called max scroll value equals, and we need to set it to the scroll width minus the client width of the tabs list. So I'll just type it over here right now, and we'll just see the values in a bit. So I'll just type tabs list dot scroll width minus tabs list dot client width, and since we added the value of 20 over here, let's also type minus 20 over here. Now I'll just console.log the value over here. So I'll just type console.log, and first of all let's type scroll width, and let's add the value over here, tabs list dot scroll width, and let's add one more console.log, and let's type client width, and let's set it to tabs list dot client width. Now let's go back to our code and let's open the console. So I'll just right click over here and click on inspect, and let's open the console. And now if we click on this right arrow, here we can see the scroll width and the client width are displayed over here. So if you go to the elements, and if I select the element, so I'll just select the tabs list, which is the UL. Now here you can see that the width of the element is 700 pixels. Now the original width of all the elements inside the UL is more than 700 pixels, and that's because it has more elements and we can scroll to the left and the right. But since we have set a max width of 700 pixels, it is showing this width of 700 pixels over here. But if we go to the console, here we can see the scroll width is 1164 pixels. Now that's basically the width that it can scroll. So right now it is 1164 pixels. Let's go back to our HTML and let's add some more elements over here, and let's see if the scroll width changes. So let's copy this and paste it a couple more times. And now let's go back to our design, and let's click on the right arrow. Now we can see that the scroll width has changed and it is now 1786 pixels, but the client width stays the same. Now if you go back and remove all these elements from here, and I'll just keep 2 elements over here, and now if you go back to our design, and now if we click on this right arrow, now we can see that the scroll width is 700 pixels. Now if you add some more elements and the width is more than the container, then it has some room to scroll, so that's when the scroll width changes. So let's go back and undo all of this. Now the scroll width also takes into account the current width of the element, so that's why we can see here in the main.js file we have subtracted the client width from the scroll width. The client width is basically the width of this tab list, and the scroll width is basically the number of pixels it can scroll. Right now let's add an if condition for this. So let's tap if, and let's tap tabs list dot scroll left, and if it is greater than or equal to the max scroll value, then we need to hide the right arrow. So let's tap right arrow container dot class list dot remove and active, and let's add an else over here. So if the condition is not true, then we need to add the active class to the right arrow. So let's tap right arrow container dot class list dot add active, and now let's go back to our design and let's click on the right arrow, and if you go all the way to the right arrow disappears. Now let's refresh this and let's scroll to the right, and now we can see when we scroll to the right the code is not being executed. So we need to add an event listener to the scroll as well. So let's go back and let's add an event listener to the tabs list. So let's tap tabs list dot add event listener, and let's tap scroll, and here we just need to call the manage icons function. So I'll just call it over here. I'll just type manage icons, and now let's go back to our design, and now let's scroll to the right, and now we can see that the manage icons function is working alright. So if we scroll to the right, the icon disappears, and if we scroll back to the left, it reappears. Now let's scroll all the way to the left, and the left arrow disappears. So the arrows are working alright. Now we need to add the event listener to the left arrow as well. So when we click on the left arrow, we need to scroll to the right. So let's go back and I'll just copy this from here and let's paste it down here. And here instead of right arrow, let's tap left arrow. And I think we haven't referenced this left arrow, so let's reference that over here. I'll just tap const left arrow equals document.querySelector scrollable tabs container left arrow svg. Now let's scroll down, and here for the left arrow we need to set the scroll left value to minus equals 200. Now let's go back and let's click on the left arrow, and we are able to scroll to the left, and if I click on the right arrow we are able to scroll to the right, and everything seems to be working alright. Now for the drag functionality, we have to take into account 3 different event listeners. Now let's break down what we do when we drag. The first thing we do is press down the mouse button, and the next thing we do is move the mouse, and the last thing we do is leave the mouse button. So these are the 3 event listeners we need to listen to. The first one is called mouse down, and the second one is called mouse move, and the last one is called mouse up. So let's go to our JavaScript file and let's start writing the code. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add an event listener for the mouse down event, and we need to add it to the tabs list element. So let's tap tabs list dot add event listener, and let's type mouse down, and here let's create an arrow function. Now when we press down the mouse button, we need to start the dragging process. So for that, let's create a variable called dragging, and by default we will set it to false. And when we press down the mouse button, we need to set the dragging variable to true. So let's type dragging equals true. Now the next thing we will do is we will add the event listener for the mouse up event. Now we will add that to the document. So let's type document.add event listener, because the mouse up event can happen anywhere on the screen. So let's tap mouse up, And here let's create an arrow function. And here I'll just set the dragging variable to false. So let's type dragging equals false. Now the next thing we will do is add the event listener for the mouse move event. So let's tap tabs list dot add event listener mouse move. And for this we'll create a function called drag. So let's create the function over here. So I'll just type const drag equals. Now in this function, the first thing we need to do is we need to check whether the dragging variable is true or false. So let's tap if, and if the dragging variable is false, we don't need to do anything. So let's tap exclamation dragging. This means that if the dragging variable is false, and if it is false, I'll just return. So this will just return out of this function. And if this condition is false, that is if the dragging variable is true, then the rest of the code will execute. Now this event listener gives us some data, so we need to access that over here. So I'll just call this variable e. You can name this anything you want. And we need to get a data called movement x, and we need to add that to the scroll value. So let's tap tabs list dot scroll left minus equals, and let's tap e dot movement x. And now let's see whether it works. So let's go back to our design, and if I drag this, we can see that the tabs list is moving, but it doesn't move with the correct speed. So if you go back to our style.css file, here we can see for the tabs list, which is the UL, we have added a scroll behavior of smooth. And if I remove that, and now if I go back to the design and if I drag, we can see that it drags correctly. So we need to remove this scroll behavior from smooth to auto when we drag. So let's uncomment this and we'll create a class for that. So let's tap scrollable tabs container ul dot, and we'll create a class called dragging. And when we are dragging, we'll just set the scroll behavior to auto. Now what we need to do is we need to go back to the main.js file, and here we need to add the dragging class. So let's type tabs list dot class list dot add dragging, and when we have this mouse up event, we need to remove the dragging class. So let's type tabs list dot class list dot remove dragging. Right now let's go back to our design and let's see whether everything works alright. So we can see that the dragging is working alright, and if I click on these arrows, we have the smooth scrolling applied. Now there's one last thing we need to fix, which is we have this right arrow and left arrow divisions, and it has a width of I think it is 200 pixels. It is 100 pixels. So now if we click on this live tab, it doesn't get selected, so we have to click it outside this 100 pixels. So we need to fix that. The same goes with this right arrow over here. We cannot click on comedy over here. We have to click after this 100 pixels width. So what we will do is we'll just set the pointer events to none for the right and the left arrow. So let's go back to the style.css file, and here let's type pointer events and let's set it to none. Now we need to have the actual icon clickable. So right now it is not clickable. So let's go over here to the SVG. So here in the SVG, let's type pointer events and let's set it to auto. Right now let's go back to our design, and now if we click over here, we can see that the comedy tag is selected and even the buttons are working alright. So that's basically how you can add the drag functionality to this scrollable slider. Right here I'm in my Blogger dashboard, and if you go to theme, here we can see I'm using this theme called Contempo Light, which comes by default with Blogger. And let's see how the blog looks right now. So let's click on view blog. So this is how the blog looks right now. Right, so let's add this scrollable tabs to our Blogger website. So we need to make some changes in the theme code. So let's go to theme and let's click on this arrow and click on edit HTML. And now let's go to the start of the body tag. So I'll just search for it over here. So I'll just press Command F and let's tab less than body. And here we can see this is where the body starts. So here we can add our HTML code. So if I just add some text, I'll just type testing. And if I just save this, And if you go back to our website and if I refresh this page, here we can see testing is being displayed. Right, so now let's add the HTML of our design. So I'll just delete this S3 from here and let's go to our source code. And here in the HTML file, here we can see this is the HTML code of our design. So let's copy everything from this line of code till the end right here. And let's paste it over here. Right, now let's add the CSS. So let's go to the CSS of the theme code. So here we can see this is all the CSS of the theme. So here at the end, I'll just make some space and I'll just add a comment. I'll just type scrollable tabs. And let's go back to our source code and let's go to the style.css file. And let's copy all the CSS from here. And I'll just paste it over here. And now the next thing we need to do is add the JavaScript. So let's go to the end of our theme code. So here just before the body ends, I'll just add a script tag and in that we will add the JavaScript. So let's create a script tag over here. And let's go back to our source code and let's go to the main.js file. And let's copy all this JavaScript from here and I'll just paste it over here. Right, now let's save this and let's see how it looks. Let's go back to our website and let's refresh this page. And here we can see that the scrollable tabs are displayed over here in our Blogger website. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to remove all these terms from here and we need to add the labels that are inside our website over here. And if I click on any of those labels, we should be taken to all the posts of that label. So if we go back to the dashboard of our Blogger website and if we go to posts, here we can see for all the posts we have these labels. So for the 5th post we have photography and tech, and then we have these other labels over here for all the posts. Now let's go ahead and access all these labels and display them over here. So for that what we can do is we can add a widget called label, which is there by default in a Blogger website. So let's go to our theme code and let's click on edit HTML. Now let's go to the start of the body tag. So I'll just search for less than body. And here let's add a widget. Now in the Blogger code, we need to first of all add a section before adding the widget. So let's create a section first of all. For that you have to type less than b:section. And you need to add an ID for the section. So I'll just type ID equals. And I'll just set the ID to labels container. And let's close the section over here. And in this we will create the widget. So let's type less than b:widget. And for the widget also we need to add an ID. So let's type ID equals and let's set it to label 1. And let's set the type of the widget to label. And let's save it. And here we can see it says more than one widget was found with this label 1 ID. So I'll just change this to something else. I'll just type label 3 and let's save it. And now we can see that the theme was updated successfully, and here we can see we have all this code generated by Blogger, and this is the label widget. Right, now let's go back to our website and let's refresh this page. And now here we can see it says labels, and if we open that, we have all these labels displayed over here. So these are all the labels that we have in our website. Right, now the next thing we need to do is we need to add all these labels inside this container right here. So let's open the inspector and let's see how this labels widget is structured. So I'll just right click over here and click on inspect. And here we can see we have this section with an ID of labels container, and in that we have this division with the class of list label widget content, and in that we have all these anchor tags. So this is the first label, and then we have the second label over here. So we have all these labels inside anchor tags. So we can reference all of them by this selector. We can select the anchor tags inside the list label widget content, which is inside the labels container. So let's go back to our theme code, and here in the HTML I'll just delete all these list items. Now let's go to the JavaScript and we'll generate all these list items in the JavaScript. Right, this is our JavaScript. Now the first thing we will do is we will reference all the labels. So let's type const all labels equals document dot query selector all, and we had an ID called labels container, and in that we had a division with the class of list label widget content. And in that we had anchor tags. And now I'll just console.log it to our website, and let's see whether all the correct values are being stored. So let's save this. And let's go back to our website and let's refresh this page. And let's open the console. And here we have this node list, and if I open that, we have all these labels stored inside this node list. And if I just type all labels, and if I select the first element, here we can see that the first anchor tag, which is the first label, is displayed over here. So now what we need to do is we need to loop through all these labels, and we need to get the inner HTML, which is the content of the anchor tags, and we need to add them inside this container right here. So let's do that. Let's go back to our code. Now we need to add all those labels inside a UL. So if you go back to the original code, here we can see we have this UL, and in that we have the list items. So we need to create a list item, then we need to create an anchor tag, and in the anchor tag we need to add the link of the label and also the label text over here. So let's go back to our code and we'll create a function for that. But before that we need to reference the UL. So if we scroll down, we have already referenced the UL over here in our JavaScript code. This is the line of code, so I'll just cut this from here and I'll just paste it over here. Right now let's create a function to populate the labels. So let's create a function called populate labels. And I'll just call the function over here. Now in this function we need to first of all loop through all the labels. So we will use a for each loop for that. I'll just type all labels dot for each, and for each of the labels I'll just give it a name of L, and let's create an arrow function. And here first of all we need to create an li. So let's type const li. I'll just name it li. You can name this anything you want. Equals document dot create element, and in that we need to add the element. So we need to have an li. So I'll just type li, and then we need to create an anchor tag. So let's type const a. I'll just name it a, and let's type document dot create element, and let's type a over here. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to set the href of the anchor tag. So here we can see we have the href. This is basically going to be the link of the labels. So let's type a dot href equals, and we need to set it equal to the link of the actual label that we have over here. We are referring to it as L over here. So let's type L dot href. So this is basically the label that we get from this labels widget, and we are just getting the values from that. So if you open this once again, here we can see we have this anchor tag, and we are just getting the href value from here, and then we are just adding it over here to our custom anchor tag. Now we need to add the inner HTML of the labels inside the anchor tags. So let's type a.innerHTML equals l.innerHTML, and now we need to append the anchor tag inside the li. So let's type li.append child a, and we need to append the li inside the ul, which we reference as tabs list. So let's type tabs list dot append child li, and now let's save this and let's see whether it works. And now we can see all these labels are displayed in our container. So here we can see all the labels are displayed over here. Now if I click on any of these labels, let's click on this label right here, and we can see that all the content of that label is displayed over here. And we can click on any of these labels and go to the posts of that label. So if I click on machine learning basics, Here we have all the posts with this label machine learning basics. Now we can simply go ahead and hide this labels widget from here using CSS. So let's go back to the CSS. And here in the CSS, I'll just type hash labels container, which is the ID of our labels widget. And let's type display and let's set it to none. And let's save it. And now let's go back to our website and let's refresh this page. And now we can see that the labels widget is not being displayed, but all the labels are displayed inside our design. Right now, the last thing we need to do is we need to set a different styling for the active labels. So right now, if I just open advanced programming concepts, here this should have a different styling. So if you go to the original design, here we can see when we click on any of these labels, we have different styling for the active labels. So let's do that. Now for doing that, we will use a data attribute. So here for the anchor tags, we'll also add a data attribute. Let me just open the HTML. Here we can see we have this anchor tag and we will add a data attribute. So we can just type data hyphen and any name we want, and we'll just store the label inside the data attribute. And then we can go ahead and easily identify it and add a different styling to it. So let's go back to our JavaScript. And here when we are populating the labels, we'll also add a data attribute. So for that we need to type a.dataset dot, and we need to add the name over here. So I'll just type link. I'll just name it link. You can name this anything you want. And we'll set it equal to l.innerHTML. Right now let's save this. And let's go back to our website and let's refresh this page. And now if you open this in the inspector, here we can see we also have a data link attribute and we have the label displayed over here. We can open any other anchor tag and we have the data link. So we're going to use this data attribute and we're going to see whether it is the active label. And if it is the active label, then we will have a different styling. Now first of all, we need to know which label is active. So if we scroll down, here we can see the active label is advanced programming concepts. And if I just open another label, so let's just open photography. And now we can see that the active label is photography. So we'll just inspect this element and let's see what is the class of the element. So here we can see we have this span with a class of search label. So what we're going to do is we're going to reference this search label element in our JavaScript, and we're going to see which of these anchor tags in our labels list has the data attribute of this search label right here. So let's go back to our JavaScript code. Here we can see we already have the code for activating the tabs, which we used in our original design. So what we're going to do is we'll just remove all this code from here and let's create a variable called current label, and let's set it equal to document.querySelector, and we had a span with a class of search label. Right now the next thing we will do is we will add an if condition. So we'll check whether the current label is present. So I'll just type if current label, and here first of all let's get the text inside this search label. So let's create a variable for that. I'll just create a variable called current label text equals current label dot inner HTML. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to get the anchor tag with the data attribute of the current label text. So right now when we have this photography label active, we need to get this anchor tag right here, because if we inspect it, we can see it has this data link of photography. So let's go back and let's create a variable called current link equals document.querySelector. And since we need to add this variable inside our string, I'll just use backticks instead of single quotes. And if you go back to our website and if I just right click and click on inspect, here we have this division with the class of scrollable tabs container, and in that we have these anchor tags, and let's reference that. So let's type scrollable tabs container A, and now here in square brackets you have to add the data attribute. So let's type data hyphen link equals, and let's add single quotes. And since we need to add this variable over here, let's type dollar symbol, curly braces, and let's type current label text. And the last thing we need to do is we need to add the active class to the current link so that it has the different styling. So let's type current link dot class list dot add active. Right now let's save this and let's see whether it works. Let's go back to our website and let's refresh this page. And now here we can see for photography we have a different styling. Let's open another label. So let's click on technology. And now we can see for technology we have a different styling. So everything is working alright. So that's basically how you can add scrollable tabs to your Blogger website. Now I will leave the link of the source code in the description so you can just go ahead and copy and paste it to your websites. Alright, that's it for this video. If you have any doubts you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.